The US men's national team plays Mexico at home and Jamaica away in the next round of World Cup qualifying in November, and today we're going to be projecting the USMNT roster for those games. What up guys, welcome to the 11 Yanks channel. I'm Pete Douthit. Most of you know me already. We discuss all things USMNT and things related to the American soccer landscape. If you're new here, smash subscribe. We have 2, sometimes 3 videos a week. If you're already subscribed, smash that like button so other people can find us. Let's dig into it. So guys, for the first time in this qualifying campaign, we have only 2 games in the window, which means we may not need to bring a massive roster. Not only do we only have 2 games, we have 4 days of rest between the 2 games instead of 3, which is what we've been having in the last 2 rounds of qualifying. So we should be able to use similar, at least starting 11s in both of those games, which means we may not need a massive roster. Now, for the sake of this video, I'm going to assume that Gio Reyna and Christian Pulisic have not recovered in time. We're hearing reports out of Dortmund that Gio Reyna may not be ready for this. His injury is taking longer to heal than they anticipated. Christian Pulisic continues to be unavailable and not even training with the team yet. There's still some pain in his ankle. I hope both of those guys recover in time. I want to stay optimistic that they'll both recover in time. Right now, that's not looking likely. And guys, that's okay. Obviously, we want those 2 guys there, but if we want to be a really strong team, we have to have quality and depth that can step up. And I think we do have quality and depth that can step up and that can still manage to get 3 points against Mexico if needed, and we'll talk about that. So for the sake of this video, those 2 guys aren't there. Now, the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to discuss who I think Gregg will have on the roster, and then I'll give my opinion about who I think should be on the roster. Now, Gregg is hard to predict. In some ways, we know that he's stubborn, we know that he has his guys that he likes, and that's fairly easy to predict. But in some ways, we don't always know what he's going to do with guys who are not his favorites. Are they in? Are they out? So it's a bit of a fool's errand trying to predict Gregg's roster, but I'm going to try to do my best. As far as looking at players and whether or not they deserve to be on the roster, I want to try to stay away from platitudes. This is something that we see a lot in the media, and even something that I'm guilty of myself from time to time. For example, saying a player is a guy who works hard. That doesn't really give me that much information about the player. Does he work hard off the ball? Does he work hard on the ball? Are we talking about his defensive ability? Are we talking about his off-ball movement when we have possession? Are we talking about his off-ball work rate when we don't have possession? So I'm going to try to be more specific about players' strengths and weaknesses and what really they contribute to the team, because when we're discussing who deserves to be on the roster and who doesn't, there is competition, and it's important that we be specific and measured about exactly what they bring to the team and whether the balance of their strengths and weaknesses is enough for USMNT roster consideration. Being more specific and nuanced about player qualities and contributions to the team is something I think we can all do better at in the USMNT fandom and media base. I'm going to try to do that in this video. So we start with the goalkeepers, and I think it's pretty straightforward. Matt Turner, Ethan Horvath, and Zack Steffen. I know that Ethan Horvath was left off in this last roster, but I think that had a lot more to do with the English restrictions about players not being able to go to Panama, and that's why Sean Johnson was there. I think these are still our top 3 goalkeepers and the 3 guys who deserve to be there. I've got the exact same 3 goalkeepers as Gregg does, and I think the conversation about goalkeeper has to be a lot more about who starts over who is in the roster. Right now, the argument seems to be between Matt Turner and Zack Steffen, and there's different sides to this argument, and again, there's a lot of nuance that we have to talk about. First of all, let's admit, Zack Steffen is significantly better than Matt Turner with his feet. I think all of us can agree on that. It doesn't mean that Zack Steffen is perfect, right? There are many times where he will try to play a ball, and I'm specifically talking about that diagonal ball to the right back or the left back on the wings that often gets overshot and goes out of bounds. We even saw that against Costa Rica in the last game. But when it comes to building out of the back, he is way more comfortable with his feet and is able to set up attacks by being an extra man in the box. Matt Turner, at 27 years old, is still not good with his feet. We've seen this many times for the national team. He cannot play with his feet. And so when we play with Matt Turner, we generally have to go long with it when we are under pressure because the risk is just too great. That being said, right now, for me, Matt Turner is the more consistent shot stopper than Zack Steffen. As much as I love guys who play with their feet, And as much as long term, I think we need to have a goalkeeper who can play with his feet if we want to be successful on a global stage. I think that Matt Turner is the more reliable shot stopper right now. He's the guy who you expect to make that spectacular save that might have been a goal. And so against Mexico, I would probably start Matt Turner. Long term though, I think Zack, Steffen, or Ethan Horvath needs to be our number one. For both of them, it's a matter of getting regular playing time. You know, Zack Steffen's drop in form coincided with his move to Manchester City and not playing regularly. I know that Zack Steffen had a good game on the weekend for Manchester City, but he's still not going to get enough games for them. And for me, he needs to be looking at a move at some point to a top 5 league where he can be a number 1 goalkeeper getting regular reps, because I do think he'll be our number 1 in Qatar. If we want to play with our feet, we can't use Matt Turner. He's a great guy. He's a great shot stopper. He should absolutely be in the roster. But if we're going to be a world-class national team, both Ethan Horvath and Zack Steffen are guys who can play with their feet, and we need them playing regularly. So I go Matt Turner against Mexico, maybe Steffen or even Horvath against Jamaica. That's how I would do it right now, but I would be fine with any of these 3 guys starting any of those 2 games. Let's dive into fullbacks now. These are the 4 guys that I think Gregg brings: DeAndre Yedlin, Sergino Dest, Antonee Robinson, and Joe Scally. Now, Sergino Dest and Antonee Robinson are locks. There's no discussion there about them. They are both the starters at right back and left back. And it's good that we've gotten 2 guys who, while they are not perfect, can be reliable fullbacks for us, especially in Concacaf. Now, of the right back options, DeAndre Yedlin, Shaq Moore, and Reggie Cannon are some of the options that Gregg has used in the past. Of those 3, I have to go DeAndre Yedlin. He can still be a liability against elite wingers, and I'm not sure that DeAndre Yedlin defending 1v1 in isolation against a guy like Chucky Lozano is the best way to go, but I would definitely have him in the roster, probably not starting against Mexico. Joe Scally is a guy who, unlike many of our other fullbacks, can defend 1v1. We've seen that from him in the Bundesliga. I think Gregg will bring him in if he continues to not only get games, but to perform well. The beauty about having these 4 guys is that while none of them is a left back, both Sergino and Joe Scally can cover at left back for Antonee Robinson, and for now, I think that's enough. George Bello, for me, technically still has real issues in the build-out. His defending 1v1 and staying switched on and concentrating inside the defensive third is still an issue, and I don't think he should be brought into this roster. Now, Bello is young, right? He's 19, he can still improve, and he may do that in the future, just like Antonee Robinson at 19 was very inconsistent. I just don't think he's going to be on this roster right now, and honestly, I do think we need to look at other options as well. My fullbacks are largely the same as Gregg's, except I also bring in Jonathan Gomez. Now, some people are going to hammer me for this. I don't care. Jonathan Gomez is a guy who's been in Mexico camp several times now. He's consistently being called up to the Mexico under-21s, and there's a real battle for him. He is moving to Real Sociedad this January, and both Mexico and the US want him. We need to get Jonathan Gomez, guys. We don't have a good backup for Antonee Robinson right now, and Gomez could easily be one of those guys. Is he ready to start playing for us? No. But he said it on a podcast. I've been with Mexico. I've seen what their camp is all about. I want to be on a US roster and see what that is all about. We need to bring him into this camp, not necessarily to play him, right? It's about getting him into the roster, having guys like Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie and Ricardo Pepi, his fellow dual national, put their arms around him, make him feel part of this group, make him feel part of this team, and saying, look, Jonathan, we don't have a solid left back for Antonee Robinson. You could end up going to Qatar if you have a good year at Real Sociedad. That could be you. After losing Julian Araujo, we cannot afford to use a strong, promising left back, and we got to bring Jonathan Gomez into this camp. Gregg's center backs are John Brooks, Walker Zimmerman, Miles Robinson, and Chris Richards. I'm just going by the guys that he used the most in this last camp. You know, John Brooks obviously is a lock. Miles Robinson is a lock. I hope Chris Richards is a lock. There's no way that you're performing at a high level week in and week out in the Bundesliga and are not a lock for our national team. And Walker Zimmerman, I think he brings in because although Walker Zimmerman wasn't in the roster last time, he played in all 3 games, starting 2 of them. So I do think that Gregg brings Walker Zimmerman in. And to be fair to Walker, he didn't play terribly. He had some moments where you saw him trying to defend 1v1 against Panama where he looked shaky. But look, against CONCACAF, these 4 guys should all be just fine. Mexico obviously is a little bit of a different story. You've got guys like Raul Jimenez, you've got guys like Chucky Lozano, even Tecatito, a few others to a degree that can be a real threat. But honestly, most of these 4 center backs should be fine. My center backs are a little different than Gregg's. I have Matt Miazga there instead of Walker Zimmerman. Look, I've been critical of Matt Miazga, okay? I think from a concentration perspective and a mentality perspective, he has been shaky and inconsistent in the past. And so I was fine with him not being on rosters. Since his move to Alaves, where he's played 6 times, including 5 starts and a clean sheet against Atletico Madrid, he has been really good. He hasn't had those extreme lapses in concentration that we've seen from him in the past. His distribution has largely been good, and he hasn't made any egregious errors. And look, center back at 26 years old, he's entering his prime. Do I think he's ready to start one of these 2 games? No. But I think it's time to bring him back into the mix and have a look at him and see if Matt Miazga is capable of and wants to contribute to this project, because he could be that 4th center back in Qatar, right? Look, if Brooks, Robinson, and Richards are healthy, I think a lot of people feel that those are the 3 center backs that go to Qatar. So it's between McKenzie and Zimmerman and Miazga and maybe 1 or 2 others to try to claim that 4th spot. We've seen the others. McKenzie I would leave out because he hasn't been really good from a distribution perspective, giving the ball away in the wrong areas of the field. He's also not as athletic. But let's talk about the center back pairings. You know, Miles Robinson, John Brooks, and Chris Richards are a lot of the discussion. Here's how I see it. Brooks and Robinson makes for a good pairing because Robinson is very good at covering for Brooks's weaknesses, right? Brooks is one of those guys who, when the ball is played in behind him, his recovery speed is very slow, and he's just not good defending on the turn. That's where Miles Robinson's athleticism and explosiveness can be a real help. And I like Chris Richards, guys. I think he's probably the highest ceiling center back in the pool. And truth be told, I would be fine with any of Robinson, Brooks, and Richards paired together in these 2 games. Probably what I would do is Miles Robinson and John Brooks against Mexico, and then depending on how they perform, either Chris Richards and Miles Robinson or Chris Richards and John Brooks against Jamaica. Miles Robinson is kind of what Aaron Long was, except he's better in possession and better at building from the back. Not perfect, certainly, but better. Chris Richards' weakness is still defending in the air. You know, he doesn't win aerial balls every time when you want him to. That's okay. He's still young. I still think he has a place on this team, and I'd like to see him get that start against Jamaica. We've got to believe in a guy like Chris Richards, right? He's very young, he has a very high ceiling, and we have to understand that there will be mistakes on the way to becoming an elite center back in the world. And that's really what he can be, guys. Jumping right into Gregg's midfielders, it's Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, Sebastian Lletget, Kellyn Acosta, Cristian Roldan, and Yunus Musah. So look, a lot of people will be surprised to see Cristian Roldan and Sebastian Lletget here, but like I said earlier, I think that Gregg is stubborn. I think that Gregg will ride or die with certain guys, and even though neither Lletget nor Roldan deserves their spot on this team for me, I do think that Gregg will bring them. Hopefully we see largely an Adams, McKennie, Musah midfield for these 2 games, and yes, they should be able to start both of those games. The one area of debate I had here is, will he bring Busio or Roldan? I think there's still a possibility that Gregg could bring Busio, and I think it's narrow. It's also possible that he'll bring Roldan as a winger, which is largely where he's played him, and Busio will occupy the 6th spot in this midfield. My midfield, as you can see, is a little bit different. Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, Luca De La Torre, Kellyn Acosta, Gianluca Busio, Yunus Musah, and James Sands. Now, in principle, this is a very balanced midfield, right? You have Tyler Adams, Weston McKennie, and Yunus Musah, who will all start. Acosta backs up Adams at the 6, and Busio and De La Torre back up Musah and Weston as those dual 8 positions. I also have James Sands here, specifically because I have real questions about Acosta. I'm reluctant to have him on this roster, and I understand maybe the need for him there right now, but the truth is we cannot rely on Kellyn Acosta, guys. He's inconsistent. When he steps on that field, we don't know if we're going to get Northern Ireland / Canada / Panama Acosta, or if we're going to get Gold Cup final Acosta, right? You know, inconsistency is something we usually attribute to young players, right? And we use it as an excuse to keep them off the roster. But Acosta is 26. There isn't an excuse for inconsistency anymore. Now, he's on this roster because if you're 1-0 up against Mexico, I could understand maybe taking off a dual 8 and putting him on to sit next to Tyler Adams and help defend. But other than that, I don't think he should be starting games for us anymore. If anything, we need to be looking at alternative options at the 6. What are they? Well, we could use a double pivot, for example. Maybe you could have one of Yunus, Musah, or Weston, McKennie paired with a Luca de la Torre. Maybe Gianluca Busio could play there. I still have concerns about Busio physically in Concacaf, but he's definitely improved in that department since going to Italy. James Sands, I think, is unfairly maligned for a poor 45 minutes against Honduras in a setup that was never going to work, sitting next to another 6. He was not great. He was actually better in that second half. But this guy is 21 years old and improving every day. He is way better in possession than Kellyn Acosta is and in the build-out. And I think we should be looking at him as a possible backup to Adams at the 6. There are other guys I think we should be looking at in the future. Maybe Christian Capis, possibly Tanner Tessman, possibly Gianluca Busio. I don't think any one player is going to really be able to take over that role completely right now, but I think a double pivot in a 4-2-3-1 or a back 3 with a guy like Chris Richards playing that false 6 role who can step into midfield and play as a false 6, sort of the way that James Sands did in the Gold Cup. I know that Sands can play that role as well too. I just think we need to be looking at better options. And to Acosta, saying your time with the national team is coming to an end. You've had many opportunities this year, and you haven't delivered consistently enough. And that's really the thing that we have to talk about with a lot of these guys, Roldan, Lletget, Acosta, Arriola, Zardes. It's not that they never have a good game or a good performance. It's that those performances don't justify the minutes they've received, and we have better, younger players who deserve a look, who deserve a chance. Remember, we're not just qualifying for World Cup. We're also trying to build a roster that can be as competitive as possible in Qatar. And if Kellyn Acosta is struggling and inconsistent in CONCACAF, how much worse do you think it's going to be at a World Cup where the quality and speed of play is so much higher? We need to be looking at other options, guys. Hopefully Aiden Morris comes back from his injuries stronger than ever, because he was a guy that I really liked. But like I said, other options, both in terms of personnel and formation. Gregg's forwards are Tim Weah, Paul Arriola, Gyasi Zardes, Ricardo Pepi, Brenden Aaronson, and Konrad de la Fuente. I do think that Konrad makes his way back onto the roster if he keeps performing as he has been for Marseille. He had a good game this last weekend, and I just think it's very bizarre that we continue to leave off one of our highest ceiling young attackers. He probably shouldn't start for us yet, but this is a guy who can dribble 1v1 like nobody else in our pool can. He's probably more like Christian Pulisic in that sense, where his ability to run at players and eat up space and take players out of the game with his dribbling. We don't have anybody in this roster outside of Pulisic right now who can do that, so leaving him off makes no sense to me, and I do think he will be there. I think that Gregg sees Gyasi Zardes as his backup to number 1 Ricardo Pepi, and Paul Arriola, who in my opinion, Gregg actually sees as further up on the depth chart than Tim Weah. He started him in 3 games, okay, in this last camp. 3 games, despite poor performances, he still considered him over Tim Weah, and only an injury kept him out of that Costa Rica game. My forwards are not quite the same. Tim Weah, Matthew Hoppe, Nicolas Gioacchini, Ricardo Pepi, Brenden Aaronson, and Konrad de la Fuente. Now I know that the knock against Matthew Hoppe and Nicolas Gioacchini is going to be this: they are not getting enough minutes for their clubs. That is correct, they are not. Does that, however, change who they are as players? Does that change their quality? No. Both Gioacchini and Hoppe hadn't played for almost 6 weeks before going to Gold Cup, and both had very strong Gold Cups. So not getting enough minutes for a very strong team in a top 3, 4, 5 league in the world does not change who you are as a player. Both of these guys would be killing it in MLS. And one of the reasons that they're here is because we don't have enough wing depth. Okay, I don't have Paul Arriola on our winger depth. Now, some people might say, but with no Reyna and with no Pulisic, shouldn't they be there? No. First of all, you only have 2 games. Weah and Aaronson should start both of those games, in my opinion, okay? With Konrad de la Fuente being a winger option off the bench, or if one of those guys gets injured. Then if you need more depth in wide areas, you have options. Both Hoppe and Gioacchini can play as wingers in a pinch. Sergino Dest can play there, as we saw this weekend for Barcelona. Yunus Musah can play there. We've seen him do it for Valencia. And all of those guys playing out of position are still better options than Paul Arriola. Let's talk real quick about Paul. What can we say about him that he's good? Work rate is a platitude. Defensively, generally speaking, he is very good. Okay? He will win a lot of his 1v1 duels when he doesn't have the ball. And oftentimes his movement off the ball is very good too. That being said, he's not productive enough in the final third with either goals and assists. He's not technical enough when you compress time and space, and he doesn't deserve a spot on this team compared to alternative options. And remember, all of that is in Concacaf. It's going to get worse at a World Cup. Matthew Hoppe and Gioacchini are potentially guys who could be involved in Qatar. They need to be involved now. We also need to see Matthew Hoppe get minutes at the 9. He wasn't given enough time in this last camp, in my opinion, and we still need a reliable backup for Pepi. Bring Gioacchini in, bring Hoppe in, let them compete for that backup spot. I think they will give us more than some of the alternative options. All right, guys, those are my picks for the roster. Tell me who you want to be there in November in the comments, and I will see you guys on Thursday.